Welcome back to Search Sean, and this is another Chat with Sean episode. And yeah, really looking forward to this one. Obviously, as usual, I'll do some housekeeping, then we get into the topics, of course. But yeah, we've been busy recently. We've had Smarty on. We just discussed, obviously, the new AI mode, how to survive in SEO these days. A lot about Reddit and the strategy around Reddit, which is really interesting. Not something I've really delved into much before. And in e-commerce, what's happening in that part of the world. I also just recorded and haven't actually put it live as of yet, but probably would be live by the time I put this one live, is I talked with Garrett Sussman. And yeah, we had a great conversation, but I'm still editing that. So it's work in progress, but I'm sure that'll be out soon. But it was a great conversation, of course. And yeah, we got two amazing guests today, and I'll get into it so we can get onto the topics. And she's already been on a few times on the channel, so you should know her by now. But Jamie Delessisandro is an associate strategist at performance marketing agency Amsive. And we're also joined by her colleague, Josh Squires. And Josh is also at Amsive, obviously, and is associate director of SEO. So yeah, thank you both for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
Yeah, let's just get into the topics because we've got a lot to cover, and I've delayed with technical issues and stuff, so I don't want to delay it further. So yeah, obviously, we've got AI in mode now. This is pretty much rolled out. I mean, you guys have had it for a while, but in the UK, it's quite relatively new. I'm not sure what to think of it yet, to be honest, but do you think it's a good or bad thing in terms of search, how it's going? I know I talked to Garrett around the possible tests they're doing in the labs around adapting it slightly, but yeah, where do you think it's going to go? And yeah, what do you make of it so far?
Gosh, well, my opinions on AI are not nearly as strong as Josh's, so I'll give you my take. But I know Josh has been really close on the AI front. For me, it's one of those things where we knew it was bound to happen. We know with, the Google events and all their announcements, they're not going to be left behind when ChatGPT and these other LLMs are gaining market share. So we're kind of like, of course it's here. For me, I have a little bit of a different thought on it. And I don't know if it's a cautiously optimistic one, but because we knew it was going to happen, it's kind of like, okay, how do we just embrace this in some capacity? So anytime you go on LinkedIn now, people are trying to crack the code of like how it's working and insights, and there's so much chatter. And so for me, I'm hoping that it continues the conversation of just how people are searching, because I think that's the core of what we do. How do people search for the information they need? So whether it's AI mode or regular Google search, what can we surmise from that behavior? So I'm hoping it leads to more fruitful conversations of just ways we can continue to educate people on their journeys, whatever they're looking for. So I know mine's a little sweeter of a thought, nicer thought than Josh. Josh, you have some thoughts about AI.
Well, we're not quite at this is the end of civilization as we know it level, but I feel like we're getting there. No. To Jamie's point, it's kind of table stakes. So totally understand why it exists, right? Search is their strongest foothold. It's their key product, even though they're trying to get into other product spaces. I know cloud is huge for them, and cloud is probably going to end up outpacing search before long. So they had to integrate it. They had to get something out there, and it's kind of a smart way to get the product in front of everybody, right? You own a domain with billions of visits a day. Why not get it out there? Free publicity, free data, right? Getting people to tinker with it and learn from it, which is super important for all the LLMs right now, right? They have all, I would say maybe with the exception of Anthropic, put out these sort of half-baked products, right? Getting to market first was the name of the game. And now that it's there, they're sort of running around plugging holes, trying to, get the top talent to make it, the smartest product on the market. and we're sort of in this arms race. And while it's less visible on Claude, it's sort of been visible on ChatGPT just because of the larger user base. But it's been very visible for Google, right? Because they were already under a lot of criticisms for what they were doing with search before they rolled out AI overviews. And this sort of took a problem that was, sort of a smoldering, bundle of ashes and turned it into a blaze. When it works well, right? And it does feel natural when it works well. And I think AI mode is going to be just an extension of AI overviews. And I would say the same thing, that when it works well. The problem is that it mostly doesn't work, or it works in ways that it shouldn't, or it's missing really important features, things like filters. And I think that's the biggest difference. And this is true across all the LLMs that conduct any sort of web search. ChatGPT pulls from Bing. We learned yesterday that Anthropic uses Exa, which we'd love to talk a little bit more about that later on. That's a very interesting find. But this search experience isn't really consistent across all the LLMs, right? And I think that lower quality in search, it's missing the features that traditional Google search has. We've all become accustomed to having, for the most part, the really obvious spam removed from our results. We're really used to, things that are relevant, things that are local. We like to give Google a lot of grief for people who maybe weren't doing this 20 years ago. We've come a very long way. And video reviews in AI mode has kind of taken us back.
Yeah, I did think it's strange, like you say, half-baked products. Like, obviously, this was all rapidly accelerated when Bing, started doing their thing with Copilot and so on. And then Google felt they had to kind of act upon it. How much was it in their roadmap before that all started? Because it seems like everyone agrees they just rapidly accelerated it, and it just was a half-baked product, as you say, and it still is. And I still feel like they're still trying to sort out the original algorithm, because that's still got loads of holes in it. And now they've got this massive product that's come along, and they're trying to keep under control and understand. And I just think, I mean, they're lucky at the moment because they have that huge market share. Like any market, if you're the market leader and you've got a huge majority of the market, you can afford to make some mistakes because you've got a loyal customer base. But when other companies start popping up on the high street and they're offering something very good, people can tend to look elsewhere. And we obviously see the user journeys fragmented a lot more than they used to be. Market share is dwindling slightly for Google. So when do they at some point just like, I don't know, I just find it fascinating where the future is going to be if they do roll it fully out AI mode. But what Garrett was talking about was this stuff in labs, that they're looking like a more Perplexity styled sort of result, which is a bit more like a mix of different assets and stuff rather than just like a whole bundle of text. That could be more interesting, I guess, because that's, You got any further thoughts on it?
Danny and I have worked on this a lot. So we both specialize in e-commerce, and I actually have a history in SaaS. And across those two things, Perplexity feels like it has the best user experience. And that could change at any point. But man, shopping on Perplexity, especially comparison shopping, great experience. Makes total sense. It's intuitive. It's clean. Easy to navigate. ChatGPT just kind of wants to feed me links. I don't get a lot of product images. We were actually testing this for a client yesterday. I cough up an image of a product, but and same with Claude. Claude doesn't want to give you product images. Claude's kind of carving out a different path. They seem to be investing more in coding and educational sort of purposes, internal like documentation interaction. They don't seem to be going after like the search space in the way that ChatGPT seems to be, or Perplexity very directly is.
Yeah, I would even adding to that with Perplexity and to Sean, what you're saying, like I think even as a user myself, part of why I've even gravitated towards using AI tools when I'm looking for answers is because I don't want to read walls of text. And it's kind of this like, kind of like internal battle as a user, but also an SEO of like, well, I know that there's certain things that need to happen in order for the right information to get out there. But then as a user, I'm like, I'm kind of lazy. I just like want exactly what I want when I want it. And I don't want to read all this other information. So it's kind of finding that balance of what the right output looks like. And to Josh's point with Perplexity, we've tested it of like when we ask ChatGPT, hey, I'm looking for this product, here's the specifications. It, for me, has always just come back with, here's a list of products and here's a link. Well, e-commerce is such a visual experience that a lot of times it's why we're buying the product. And Perplexity does a really nice job of creating those like charts where it's like, here's the product. And sometimes they'll pull in like the price information. They really make it a fruitful experience. And something we even saw for one of our clients who's in the beauty space, we were doing a little bit of research of like, hey, I'm looking for this product. I wanted to see if they came up. Perplexity almost has built their own like shopping knowledge panel within Perplexity. And we shared this internally. I was like, whoa, like, look at this. Like, it literally looks like Google's own shopping knowledge graph. So each LLM, like Josh was saying, they're kind of carving out their own path. But especially for us as we work with our e-commerce clients, Perplexity is at the forefront of how do we make sure we're optimized for that? And that's why we encouraged all of our clients to sign up for the merchant, program. So when it's eligible to submit your product feed information to do that. But yeah, it's as a user, I know I gravitate towards one or the other depending on what I need. Sometimes if I need more informational stuff, I'll go to ChatGPT, shopping recommendations, Perplexity. But as a SEO, it's been, for lack of better words, a wild experience of just trying to keep it all together and, being mindful of AI and how it's changing, but also what we know, and I'm sure we're going to do it too, not abandoning SEO best practices because that's at the core of, AI optimization. So I've been a little like, AI is doing the most right now, but it keeps things exciting. But it's been wild. It's always a new thing every day, Sean. It's a new thing every day.
Quite
And speaking of which, obviously, Apple have just recently said they're going to make their own form of search engine. It looks like answer engine. So they're going to enter the game. And obviously, we've had new browsers. So, how do Google keep hold of this market share? And do you think they can into the same levels of what they have now? Or do you think it's just inevitable that the way that people's user journeys are changing, it's going to naturally just drop off because people are using LLMs and social media platforms?
I think that's a great question because at least for me, so like my journey into SEO has obviously been a little bit shorter than Josh's. But I think the journey for Google users, and we've seen this sentiment, even just in the past few years before AI kind of really took precedence. There's always been this sentiment of not everybody, but people don't always find what they need. And I think we really felt that when Reddit became really prominent in searches. So we kind of saw this shift of people going to Reddit forums and they want that firsthand experience. They want a more, quicker response to things, and just anecdotally seeing accounts of people saying, I just can't find what I need on Google, or I don't trust the results, just whatever it is. So I think Google's aware of this. And I think Google knows that they've had these problems. So now as a business entity, they're facing market share issues. Now you have AI and LLMs coming in. So they're like, oh my God, we got to make sure we keep up. So for me, in a little more of a pessimistic view, I think Google's going to do what they need to do to not lose their market share. So they're going to adapt however they feel the need to adapt. And the thing that we I think forget as SEO sometimes. Google has so much data that they're processing and looking at daily that they probably have things planned that we're not even thinking about. But to me, yeah, I think Google's going to do what they need to do to keep their market share. Now, whether or not we think it's the right choice, that's more on us. But I think we're seeing that with the onset of AI mode. I know that there's been talks about whether Google's going to make that their default search. So instead of showing Tumbleweed, are they just going to go right to AI mode? So I don't think Google's going to give up their market share if they can allow it to happen. So it's going to be a bloodbath, in my opinion.
I think it's going to look exactly like everyone's GSC graphs right after AIO's. Because if you think about it, the use case for LLMs is not exclusively search, right? So when we say that ChatGPT has 500 million users, and we try to compare that to Google's users, that's not a apples to apples comparison, right? I think the last number I saw said 70% of searches. I think this was Semrush's number. 70% of interactions on LLMs are something other than the 4 traditional intents of search.
Whatever.
And it's this sort of like no fifth category of like, help me make a thing. And if 70% of that total user base isn't conducting search, then their user base is significantly smaller relative to Google's, search audience. So I don't see Google being being very threatened at the moment. But again, we're really a year into this, being available to the broader public, of it being part of, the cultural zeitgeist. We're still in the novelty phase, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to go out onto the internet, Facebook, Reddit, whatever, and there's pretty clearly differing opinions on the value of AI. A lot of people hate it, a lot of people like it, and then there's extremes at both ends. So I think what you're going to see is Google will very probably lose that top line. People who were previously using Google for things like, quick answers to what I would call a quote unquote simple knowledge, trivia. Who's that actor that played in that thing? Which, incidentally, not all the LLMs are very good at. Play that game often, I get mixed results. Google and IMDb are still the best way to find who that person is in that thing. But I don't see the buyer journey abandoning Google. I don't see people actually seeking to understand complex topics leaving Google. I think they're going to go there first. And we've got some early data to sort of back that. I think it was, it might have been SparkToro, it might have been Semrush. Somebody had put data that showed that LLM users are coming back to Google. They're going like 70, 80% of the way down a funnel, and then getting to a point where they want to validate that information, and they're going to Google to validate it. And that's super important to us as SEOs. That is the entire thing our careers hinge on, is that Google has all the trust. And as much as we like to give Google a hard time and say they're awful people and everything they do is, harming everybody, at the end of the day, we still trust them for knowledge. And so as SEOs, as consultants, as business owners, it's our job to make sure that we're there to keep delivering on that trust and to ensure that the quality of those bottom of funnel results are still there, and work our way back up from that. Because we can already see it. There's definitely going to be people who just aren't going to engage with AI. We're going to have AI Luddites who are going to stick to traditional search. Don't know what they're going to do if Google ever gets rid of the 10 blue links, but it already kind of looks like Google is trapped in their own little design sphere. They're making AI mode look like traditional search already, right? It's a lot more text. It's laid out differently, but the links are still there. The previews for shopping are there. They've announced, YouTube videos are coming. They're putting the carousels in, right? Like it's going to be the exact same thing in just like a slightly different interface and with slightly more conversation. So I see Perplexity and possibly Apple coming in and maybe interfering with that a little bit, but we're talking like maybe 1% or 2% max of market share. I don't see Google ever dropping below 80% because they're holding too many of the cards, right? They're not just providing the interface, providing the data, they're providing the compute, right? Everybody has to go through them. And I think it'd be kind of naive to assume that those contracts don't come with language prohibiting other kinds of interactions, right? You can use our compute, but you can't interfere with X, Y, Z, right? I imagine that stuff is in there because if you've heard anything about Google's legal team, those guys are really good at what they do, right? That's going to be an airtight agreement, and they're going to look out for all parts of the business. So I don't see Google going away. I don't see our lives being upended so much, but we're definitely going to have to, for the first time in 15, 20 years, care about something other than Google search.
Yeah. I mean, you're right in the sense, definitely with their legal team. I mean, if any other company had this many lawsuits going on at once, and the things that were being exposed were coming out against them, people just would stop using them in their droves. But it just kind of goes under the radar, and they just seem to like keep pushing it away. So that's interesting. And yeah, obviously they got agreements in place, and obviously all the finance behind it. It will be interesting. Obviously, one thing and concerns many is how obviously zero click traffic, like the amount of clicks that aren't going through to websites now, and there's data coming out of how many stick onto Google services and stuff. So Google pushing people around their own services rather than onto websites. It may come a point where publishers are like, you spend a lot of time and effort to create content. When do it come a point where they're saying, well, the traffic's not here. Why are we creating this? Why are we hiring teams of content writers on decent wages to write content if no one's seeing it? Or we can't have good enough data, at least, to show that people are seeing it enough. And that's what, the concern is, until AI start, I guess, creating its own content.
As you know, we both work with Lilire, who is a huge proponent out there, calling out Google on all the ways that they're infringing upon the business models of publishers, all the way that they're harming publishers. And being an American in particular, press is really important to our day-to-day life, to our general survival as a country, particularly with, a lot of the madness going on currently. So I totally agree. The zero-click phenomenon is a real liability to publishers, but I take an unpopular opinion on it. And I'm gonna get some hate mail for this one. I think it is partially, dare say mostly, on the publishers. I've been a news reader since I could pick up a newspaper, and it pains me to read the news in a digital interface anymore. Because when I go to a publisher I trust, I am inundated with pop-ups, ads, auto-playing videos that sit over top of the article I'm trying to read that loudly play in my face when I came for a particular piece of information that I actually cared about. And I want to shout out 404 Media, a fairly new journalist group publishing on, really timely, really interesting articles at a much slower pace, a much lower volume, but articles of high import to me at least. And I think generally very interesting topics relevant to most people who work in the digital world. They have a model where you basically just join the mailing list. They show up in search. I think they actually changed their robots. I think they are like blocking out everybody now. Shout out to the bravest journalists in the world. Sign up for the email address. You can go and you can read great articles written by great journalists who don't interfere with you getting your news, right? Yes, there's ads, but they're not breaking up the content with ads. They're not, there's not pop-ups everywhere. I'm not being absolutely blasted with a million things I did not come there for. Traditionally, that's what news on the internet looked like. And it got to where the value of a click became less and less. And so publishers had to put more and more ads, more and more distractions in. now's their chance. Now is their chance to reclaim the values of those clicks. But it's going to take a really scary, honestly, quite dangerous business move to change that, right? You have to know that you absolutely will take a loss, right? But what is the value of that loss? That like 8-second click that's, hits the page, closes all your pop-ups, closes out a couple of ads, reads like the first 3 sentences and leaves. Is that a valuable click? Is that really your audience? And that's the big thing about, the 0-click phenomenon is, was that ever really your audience, or were you a stepping stone on the path to another purchase? As SEOs, you don't see a lot of cohort analysis. You don't see a lot of people checking to see if the person who clicked on my blog post 3 months later, did they come back and buy something, right? Are we paying attention at that level? And so we get upset when we lose that blog post click. But I'm not hearing a lot of our sales are declining at the same rate, which means those people weren't coming back. So the best advice you can get is start from the bottom and work back up. The middle of the funnel is soft for most everybody because people focused on things like content, which is top of funnel, and then converting pages, your PDPs, your sales pages, solutions pages, things like that. And there's this big soft middle, like we've talked about this as SEOs probably a fair amount for the last 2 or 3 years, this like soft middle of marketing where we don't really know what the user journey looks like. We don't really know what those questions are, or how to answer them. And we try, but very few people actually succeed at it. And I think if 0-click is a thing that frightens you, that should be where you look first is, if I can't get the first click, can I get the second? And how can I get them to convert on the second click, right? Trying to get them to move through the funnel faster, which is what the LLM is doing, right? And that's what's happening with 0 clicks. That's what's happening with AI overviews is you typed a thing and I inferred what you wanted and I took the entire user journey all at once and spat you out at the end of it. And either you're ready to purchase now or you're not, and you'll come back to the thing I gave you in, a couple of weeks.
I was going to say, I think that was such a good point because the way that I've kind of viewed the whole onset of AI and all of these things is that still at its core, these are businesses that we're helping. These are still business entities. They're trying to sell products, make money, whatever the nature is. And that doesn't change. And now there's different paths to purchase. There's different ways they're getting there, but it's still at its core, you have responsibility to your customer. And God, Josh, hearing you talk brought me back to when we would do audits of some sites and we would bring up that very thing. We would say, listen, we would always take the approach of, yes, we're here to help you with SEO and we'll, recommend what we need to do for this. But we can't help you if we don't understand these business decisions, because sometimes it's not about, SEO for this client. Sometimes it's about, okay, what's going on internally that it's going to impact your SEO. And we have to have those conversations. And there was one site I remember we audited and now we called that out. We're like, I can't even scroll without getting hit with ad after ad. And I'm like, I want to jump off this page. And that became a very real thing of like, why are we doing that? Can we make that better? And so I think as, again, AI and all these different surface level things change and they expand, businesses still have a responsibility to make the right decisions, look at their data closer and just really figure out, are we putting the right pieces in place to create a sustainable business for the long haul, no matter what different marketing activities happen? So that's kind of where my head's been at of like, when we work with our clients, what are those discussions looking like? And, Josh and I are the type where we don't just focus on, the initial SEO needs. Like that's an important part. We do that, but we're getting in there. We're asking questions. We're talking to teams like, who are you connected with internally? How can we talk with that team? So yeah, brought me back to some audits we did, Josh. It all came flooding.
Yeah, they're very obviously valid points. Obviously, it all depends on industries. There's certain industries I feel have been hit more than others, and maybe some of that is justified and some isn't. So I still think, like, when I did the survey recently with 52 SEO professionals, and the big thing around did they trust Google or not, and a lot of it was, well, most said no in some capacity because of that kind of contract that you have. We create good content and you give us our rewards, and if that rewards in, there's no reward for it, then obviously that is kind of breaking that social contract. And obviously I get Joshua saying, I totally agree with some websites have just created a user experience that isn't beneficial for anyone. But obviously Google have also themselves, like, the search engine results are quite cluttered and full of rubbish on there that doesn't need to be on there. And some of the results are, there's misinformation and, misguidance. And so, it's harsh to take all that away from the people that have worked hard on content. And if you can't replace it with something that isn't foolproof, then it's a bit of a, hard pill to take for some people who are, I know in our sector, there are people that have seen the bottom line hit, which is a big thing. And, but like you say, to support your point, no, Mark Williams-Cook, who's been on recently, kind of said something similar in our conversation, that some people who've built websites have taken their eye off the ball and kind of added in all these sort of hurdles and obstacles for people to get through to actually do what they want to do. And he used like Amazon as an example. Amazon, it's a very basic website, hasn't changed hardly ever since it launched, but people just use it because it's such an easy user journey to go through. And despite most people, if you ask them if you agree with how they run their company and the ethics behind the company and all they'd probably disagree and say that they don't agree with it. And also, if you ask people a few years ago if you would trust to have your credit card stored within the website and stuff, you'll probably say no, but you do it because people like the ease of it. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Obviously, it's a thing that Google has to work between kind of giving the user the best, journey that they can get to where they want to do, but also rewarding those publishers for actually putting the time and effort in. But obviously, they've got their own stuff they need to work on if you are causing problems in that user journey as well. And yeah, I think, like you said, it was, I guess in the past, it's been kind of, because you have this large amount of traffic and you do have some that are kind of less interested than others, you kind of feel like you have to do something to kind of get their attention to keep them on there and kind of convert some of them more than you were before. But now, like you say, they're going to be more rarer to come by. So you have to properly work through that funnel. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. And this is why SEOs have to work with different teams, which leads me on to the next point. If, as digital marketeers, what should we be working on, or paying more attention to these days? Obviously, rather than just Google.
We have this discussion all the time. I feel like you're in those chats with us asking this. For us, and I think I might have said it even on our last chat when something similar came up, but AI, SEO, it doesn't change, I think, the core principles of what people need when they're searching for something. They want to know, is this a legitimate site? Am I getting what I need? Are all the trust signals there? Do I even know this brand exists? It still comes back to brand. And this is a conversation actually that we just had yesterday with a client of ours. We got to connect with their PR team because we're like, listen, part of our roadmap for success for SEO is going to involve PR. And what we're seeing with the LLMs and all of that, brand still matters. The same way Google's looking for these trust signals, I think the AI tools are as well. And so how are you building your brand? It always comes down to that. How do people know that you exist? How do people know that you are the go-to provider when I'm searching for X thing? And so we've really taken the approach with our clients is asking those questions. what are you doing to promote your brand? What brand building activities are you doing? Are you doing out of home campaigns? Are you doing paid ads? Like, what does that look like? Because we know more and more that those activities have upward benefits for us on SEO. And alternatively, when we have sites where they are heavily driven by branded terms and we see traffic fluctuate because of that, we again have to ask that question, did a paid campaign change? Did you pull back on brand spend? Like, what is it? They all interconnect at some point. And so brand has become much more prevalent. Something else I would even say, and I think as SEOs and digital marketers, this has always been important, but now more than ever, clean data, having the right reports to be able to ask the right questions and get the right answers. So we're actually doing this with a client where, Josh and I sat down and we were like, all right, like, here's some things that we want to achieve. Here are the questions that we want to ask. Do we have a report that matches that? And so we worked with the, parties appropriately to get reports built to get those answers. Because I think that as SEOs, sometimes we're looking just at like search traffic data, and that's half the battle. That's half the job. But for us, we really want to lean into, what are your retention rates? What are your, lifetime value of customers? What percentage of your traffic is, converting, coming back, all of these things. So kind of what we were saying earlier, getting a click, is it actually the right click? And so working with these sites to make sure that they do have the right data in place, they do have a method for us to build reports. It's something where it's not new. We always should have cared about data, and I think a lot of us do, but it's really leaning into it and really making sure we have the right reports set up. So that's where my conversations have been with clients. And Josh, I know you and I we have these talks a lot, but anything else that you particularly are doing?
I mean, at this point, it's kind of a script for us, right? We say the same thing, everybody, and absolutely nobody's doing it prior to us saying. And I worked in-house for a big chunk of my career too, and it's a struggle for in-house SEOs as much as it is agency.
Yep.
Taking that data, and something I actually haven't seen much of is aligning the data, or I guess filtering the data through your brand personas, knowing your ideal customer profile is, and looking at the data through that lens. Because what you'll find is a lot of your low value clicks, low AOV customers, anything like that, where performance goes soft is usually where you are getting traffic from people who aren't your ideal customer profile. And you can make hard decisions knowing that affecting people who aren't your ICP, maybe that's okay, right? That's sort of like icing on the cake traffic, icing on the cake revenue. If I continuously serve my ICP, I will generate better revenue, better traffic, right? I will come to be known for a thing. We talk about niche sites a lot. When you talk about niche anything, you're talking about a very particular ICP. And the better you serve it, the bigger you are in your niche. That's true across the board. Now, an ICP can be broad, right? Amazon shoppers, Walmart shoppers, those are very large groups. But, somebody, the group of people who shop at the local denim boutique down the street might be 20 people, right? But that local denim shop, if they excel at focusing on what those customers want and delivering it, those customers won't shut up about that brand, right? They're going to shop there regularly. They're going to tell their friends. And that's how you build fans of the brand. That's how you build brand affinity. And that brand will grow. Now, the thing a lot of people don't account for is that there's a cap on that market. The number of people who want to spend $300 on a pair of blue jeans, not very large, right? Especially in this economy. But we live in a capitalist society where after a certain point, the board demands profit. The board demands growth. We have to push past what is actually a hard ceiling and find ways to grow businesses where now we're operating outside of our ICP. And I see this happen with a lot of businesses. Once you start being forced to operate outside of the ICP, you start making the ICP unhappy. Your ideal customer says, well, this isn't for me anymore. This has introduced a bunch of things I don't care about. They've made my journey harder. They've, softened the brand and bringing it back to Google. I think there was kind of a lot of shock and dismay when they got rid of the don't be evil portion of their company ethos. And kind of a telltale sign that came at a very particular time in history. And a lot of companies do that. A lot of companies are taking the don't be evil out of their manifests, and it's changing the brand. And as SEOs, we're not well positioned to have these conversations. We need the in-house brand team to back us up, and we have to be careful about stepping on toes. And, I think probably the biggest problem SEOs are likely to encounter in having those conversations are the politics. The ability to be incredibly diplomatic while still stating some very hard facts is not everyone's cup of tea. And you kind of have to be a very particular kind of person to do it well and achieve your goal, right? It's one thing to be able to articulate it. It's another to be able to get the buy-in to change it and get the behaviors in place that need to happen. That's a very long-winded way of saying that everything's going to come back to brand. It's going to be, honestly, it's always been important for search, but it's going to be more important for LLMs because the LLMs are looking through the brand lens. I don't want to say first, but it's definitely one of the early filters, right? It's looking for what is the most popular, what is the most recent, what appears in the training data most frequently, which the volume of your appearances on the internet is directly proportionate to the amount of brand spend that you have.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen in studies recently about brand mentions and branded clicks and stuff having that real, influence in terms of being showing up in those results. And yeah, when I've done my own independent studies in terms of why are we showing up for products and others aren't, or vice versa, it's always coming down to the brand is doing this, the brand is known for this, the brand is, and I guess this is really, this is the one good thing I see out of all this, is that it's a bit like a holy shit moment in the sense that we've kind of been saying that, well, you should have been. I mean, I have, and I'm sure many SEOs have been saying this for a very long time, that every single piece of marketing you do in or outdoors, online or offline, all plays a part in the sense of how we're seen and perform on search to some capacity. We've all seen it. If you put billboards out and you see search traffic increasing for branded terms because they found you that way and so on. So it has that influence. And now, I'm sure loads of SEOs have been saying as well, we need to manage reviews. We need to manage local listings. We need to manage how we're seen on social media. Yeah. And now this is all playing into the hands, into that, it's coming to fruition in the sense that this is all happening now and it is playing a big part. So now we're kind of saying to other teams, I'm sure many are, that we have to start working together very, very closely or we're going to fall behind, and people need to manage this and people need to look at that. So I think in a way it's a good thing because it should bring marketing teams more aligned and working together rather than our silos, because I'm sure many websites have seen the traffic fall and start to panic, and not everyone has money to pump into paid to kind of, catch up with the traffic falls. And I was going to say is obviously, because this is, I work for Women and obviously we're a well-known brand in the UK, but, there are smaller charities that don't have the kind of any similar, a budget of any kind, and they rely heavily on the organic reach that they had and stuff. And now, obviously organic reach has dropped. It's even social, like if you post something on social now with only paid backing behind it, you don't hardly reach anyone. So all that sort of organic reach, it used to be on socials and the search results have kind of gone away. So how does a brand that doesn't have that money to pump into any other big parts of marketing kind of survive in this new world?
Josh, I'll let you kick that one off.
So I was super fortunate that I got to work at Tableau right as they were taking off. I joined, I think, like a 12-person marketing team that was absolutely massive by the time I left it just under 2 years later. And Tableau built I don't want to say they built their brand, but they pulled people in with events. And simply being in person, meeting the people who liked your product, who liked your brand, and helping them, right? They would do things like, have clinics in local areas. They would deputize people. They had such fans of their brand that it was kind of like, a little gold star to work with Tableau, to be a brand ambassador who would be the go-to person in market across the entire globe to host a local meetup where you bring your Tableau problems and they help you solve it because they're an expert, right? Finding community and interacting directly with that community through whatever means you have, right? That can be co-branding. That can be a stall at the local farmer's market. That can be, meetup nights at the pub. Whatever it is, you need to be visible. And if you can't pay for it, the one thing that's free is showing up. And I think events does not get enough credit for the role it plays in marketing. And it's hard. It's not for everybody. Tableau won because a Tableau event is a straight up party. One of the greatest conferences I've ever been to, and not everybody can do that. And it took them a while to get there, but I think it's a really good model, right? If I can't go and spend $1 million in PPC, if I don't have the runway to build up a great SEO program, and we work with sites all the time where, it's really unfortunate that you didn't get better help in your web design and that there's just a lot of technical issues and you don't have a great content plan, and the ramp up alone is going to be 6 months. Results may come in a year later. You may not have that time, right? Events and just being in person, and honestly, can't underestimate the effects of print media. Your local printer doesn't charge a whole lot, right? You can go make flyers. You can go make posters. I think like having somebody with really good design sense on your brand team and one good event marketer will get you off the ground or keep you afloat while you're buying time for other really important marketing changes. And that's a level of strategy we don't see a lot of. And I think that is in large part due to how everyone's been siloed for the last 10, 15 years. And we were just having this conversation with a client the other day that when I started in marketing, I was in a room with PR, paid, the web team, like we all sat together, we all talked, and everything was done campaign style. You would have a plan for the year, broken out into quarter, broken out into weeks, and you just executed against it. And that doesn't really happen anymore. Some places still do it, but most don't. And so I don't have visibility on what everyone else is working on. I don't get to sit at a table and talk about the trade-offs. Hey guys, we only have this much budget. How are we going to divide it up? And be able to talk about, well, where and when can we get the most traction for every dollar spent throughout the entire course of a year, and stack our tactics in a way that builds comprehensive strategy. And, a channel by channel approach is never going to get you there. So I think, to Jamie's point earlier, being in the data, knowing your audience, that's table stakes. That is something you have to do. Once you know your audience, you can know things like where they are online and offline. You can know what they like, what they don't like, and how to engage with them. And if your marketing isn't rooted in that, you might win in the short term, but as soon as competition heats up, as soon as market forces change, your ability to ride those things out is never going to be as strong as it would be if you had those things.
Yeah. I think Josh, you made so many good points, because where my head goes to is, I think, and I feel like, we're all guilty of this, right? When you have the day-to-day stuff you're working on and you kind of just get into your flow, sometimes we just forget to take it back. Like, we're marketers. We can be creative, throw ideas at the wall. Like, go back to, if the term is still being used, guerrilla marketing. Like, what are just some things that you can do that are not maybe things that you normally would think of? And I've always positioned this as like, you're just testing it. Test it, see if it works. Like, Josh, what you said about flyers, try it out. It's a low cost or free thing to do. Did it make any movement? I think there's a lot of brilliance and collaboration that as we become more siloed, we lose that and we forget that. And I've even seen it when we bring in other teams and you start talking and asking questions and you learn what they're doing, you're like, oh, wow, we have some great ideas from this that we wouldn't have had otherwise if we didn't have these conversations. So part of it is also reevaluating how we're all working together internally. Could you be someone at your organization that champions collaboration with other departments? That could be the difference between, a new idea and not. So I think, again, it's like, again, AI, all these things are so new, but the core stuff never changes. There's still stuff at the core we have to address. And that's where I think the brilliance can really happen.
Yeah. And at least we not forget that Brighton SEO started off in a pub and is now one of the biggest, if not the biggest SEO conference going. So, and, we all got to start somewhere. There are still reasonably affordable options online still, if you find the right thing that hits with your audience, like YouTube Shorts and that kind of thing. There's new platforms that come around and potentially you could reach your audience there, So you can do things on a shoestring budget if you work it properly. And like you say, collaboration. I think sometimes, one team could try something, testing out a platform and it flops, because they haven't got the right people involved in, putting it out, rollout. And then they say, oh, well, that didn't work. But actually, if they worked with the SEO team or whoever, the creatives or whoever, what team, they could have actually optimized it better. And that as a collaborative effort, it could actually had a bigger effect and actually worked. So that's why it's actually important to talk to each other about things that are going on.
That's such a good point. And I find on the agency side, we are frequently the middleman between the in-house team and the executives. And the executives want you to test and learn. Like, we hear that consistently. And I'll recognize that some people say things and don't always mean it. But for the most part, I think that if you can say, hey, look, we spent X amount, we tried this thing, we didn't get the result we wanted, but we looked at the data and we think, here's 2 or 3 things we could have done differently. Can we do a second run? Right? Having a test and learn strategy, having clear KPIs at the outset, and then really taking the time to pick apart both successes and failures, right? Trying to figure out where we're getting traction, where we're not getting traction, how it could be better. And again, making sure that the stuff you're putting out is aligned to your ideal customer profile, that that'll get you closer to the mark right out of the gate, as opposed to we have the message, we have the product, but we're not accounting for the person.
Yeah, no, 100%. The future of content, we're learning all the time, but AI is kind of the way it's extracting content from websites. It prefers some forms of it compared to others and different things like how you structure that. So where do you see the role of content and how it should be produced going forward? And also the actual role of websites, because I think that's really fascinating. And, we're going to see traffic numbers dwindle perhaps. And if we keep going down this same route, will the user face, will it ever go past that user face of that AI platform? Or if people are coming through voice more often and, they've got their Alexa and all those sort of things, that everything's going to have AI built into it. Will it ever, do you think the roles of websites are going to change going forward as well? I'm just fascinated by that. So if you got any opinions?
Yeah, I know Josh has opinions.
I'm going to give Jamie a first crack at it. yeah, it's gonna help all of us to think about the life cycle of this entire environment. Right, we're in a period of change, and what's true now probably isn't going to be true in 2 or 3 years. What is true is the search engines and the LLMs both don't get to answer any questions if the content doesn't exist. Could they continue answering questions if content stopped being produced today? Yeah, most questions, I think. News, they have a method for, dealing with news, right? They're just going to go and retrieve the latest article. So news folks, you're safe. That's good news. Competition's probably higher, but there's still a chance. But for the folks out there creating, the 15,000th, how to do XYZ post, there's probably not utility in that unless you have a unique angle, not unless you have unique tips, not unless you write about it in a unique way. Even then, you may not get the click. And honestly, I think that's okay. I think the content still needs to exist. The LLM's going to have to ingest it. And this is where we get into talking about the marketing funnel, right? High level stuff, I truly don't really care if I get the click. I'd rather you see the information, right? If the LLM pulls a phrase or two from my site and the user gets to see it, I still think the job was done. I'm hoping it pulls the right piece. We have to account too for the ubiquity of information across the. They may pull from somebody else's site, but that site may say the same thing as mine, and that's fine. Somewhere along that journey, I'm going to have a better opportunity to get in front of that person as they ask deeper questions, as they start to verify what the LLMs are telling them, as they start clicking links or going to Google to search. That is my opportunity. We got to stop thinking about first click as being the only opportunity, right? Who still uses first click attribution? Show me one company using first click attribution, right? It's not the thing that we think it is. We should be monitoring, clicks across the entire funnel. We should be looking at other channels where the first touch is a key player, right? Rely on those methods a little bit more. Still create the information, right? It's still a branding opportunity. It's still an opportunity to show up. You could get that first click, but odds are also pretty good that some other channel is going to get a more valuable first touch that either gets somebody through the funnel faster, their cohort sends a higher volume more consistently, something like that. We're going to come back around. If you look at where SEO falls in the customer journey across all the customers on your site, SEO almost always shows up. PPC has a good run at keeping us out. You can click a PPC ad and then come in through other ads and just never touch search. That's entirely possible. But for the most part, SEO falls into every mix. And so we should be thinking about where we fall into all of these other mixes. What would be a really, useful analysis is to go look at all of those user journeys and figure out what is the most common step where SEO comes in at first touch. Maybe on average, SEO is the 6th channel to get a touch, and there's 2 more touches before conversion. Okay, wow, we're really deep in the funnel. We might want to try to push in the middle of the funnel. We might want to get up there to like 3rd and 4th. First is just kind of icing on the cake still, right? We need to think about what channels immediately precede SEO and how to better work with them and how to make sure that, their handoff to us is as airtight as it can be and work on getting throughput through the funnel, right? SEO is going to be a lot more analytical by simple needs, right? Like this is not beginner level stuff. And this is stuff that, again, due to siloing, the conversations just aren't happening. But SEO still has tons of utility, tons of opportunity, but our eyes have been set too high up in the funnel for too long. We're too used to being the first and the last click. And we've been a little spoiled by that. Now we actually have to do the real hard work, right? We're out there with social playing in the middle or, display and remarketing, right? If you don't know how those channels work, go talk to those people, go learn how those channels work, figure out how to get the user from the middle, right? That's where our opportunity is going to be. That's how we're going to save traffic. And hey, the good news is if you lost all of your first clicks, if that top line went away when AIOs showed up, but your bottom line stayed relatively the same, good news, the opportunity is still there. You can get some of that traffic back and turn it into converting traffic. You can actually raise the bottom line. So spend more time in your marketing and analytics, spend more time thinking about the funnel and the ICP.
God, those are so good. And I like that we're kind of weaving a thread here of it goes back to your data. It goes back to your brand. It goes back to knowing your audience. Like these things have never changed. And again, I think I'm very mindful of like sometimes when the shiny new thing comes out, we abandon that. We're like, oh my God, we got to make sure we're taking care of this all up here, but like this here matters. And for me, specifically for the future of websites, I don't know if I'm biased, but I still think they're important. Like your website doesn't just serve for SEO purposes. It is a digital representation of who your brand is. So when people are doing business with you, regardless of how they found you, you have the opportunity to make a really great first impression. You know, people come onto your site, they want to know who you are. You know, I take the example of e-commerce, right? Say you were a clothing brand who promotes sustainability and, you know, eco-friendliness. Well, how are you doing that? Like, what are you saying about yourself? Like, your website is about you. It is your opportunity to showcase your value, press releases, people talking about you. It's a way for people to connect with you, with you and your brand. And I don't think we should diminish the value of websites. I think we should really treat them like the importance that they are. You know, they're a way to people to know about you. And when we take, you know, e-commerce for an example, I know that the LLMs, there's talk of them integrating, you know, payment methods, shopping directly through those portals. I'm a little skeptical. Maybe others feel the same way. So people are still shopping on your site. You still need to have those elements there. I know when I'm shopping on a website and I'm, you know, buying clothes, I'm looking for what's your size chart, what's your return policy, how does this fit, what are the reviews? Like I'll buy clothes based on the reviews and the photos. The core elements to how we shop and what gets us to make a purchase has not changed. And I don't think that's going to change because I think there's still the basic human psychology of why we buy. That's always going to be prevalent no matter what platform you're doing it through. But I don't think we should abandon our websites. I think if anything, we should be revisiting them to say, how do we make them better? And something I'll be really curious about, we have some larger enterprise sites where people go right to the homepage and just search directly on those sites. We have one site where 37% of their organic search to the homepage ends in somebody doing a site search. So your website still matters. So how do we ensure that it's, again, the right experience for them and the content on that home on the site, it builds your topical authority, which is going to matter for Google, like we know, but also for LLM. So it's like, how do we know that you're the best in the thing if you have no data points to show that? And some of those data points comes from the content on your website. So I'm team website. Don't abandon your websites. Don't let AI fool you. Keep your website. You know, like Josh said, get really friendly with your creative person on brand. Do some really cool designs. Like there's a lot of opportunity there, but your website is still going to matter 100%.
Well, I feel like it's worth adding to, if you're a new website, like if you have a new product in the market, you're fresh, you don't have content, you have, you know, your SaaS always comes to mind because, you know, they will put a website up overnight.
Okay.
AI will build you a website instantly, right? So you can have your homepage and your product page, your about, your contact, but in an LLM world, you need all of that content for context, right? The machine does not know you. It doesn't know where you fit into the ecosystems. And there's added value for, you know, even folks that have sort of the basic content that do a good job explaining, you know, who they are, what they do, how you use them. There's still opportunity to talk about where they fit into whatever it is, whatever process it is that they do. You know, a little less e-commerce, a little more SaaS, a little more services, sort of websites. But one thing that I think there's immense opportunity is where your thing fits into a process. So, obviously I am in all the AI tools all of the time, and I'm asking it to build me things and make me things. And something that's caught my eye is the unprompted recommendations for specific software. So really good example. I was, tinkering, trying to build a keyword analysis tool. I gave it no specifics. Clean install, logged out, ChatGPT. It recommended that I use the Ahrefs API.
Wow.
Interesting, right? Like why Ahrefs? How did you get there? Why not Semrush? Why not anybody else? And like that bears digging into. How do they manage that? I got curious. I tried the same set of questions in a different LLM. Ahrefs came up again. It took the third one before I did get the Semrush. So that's a whole area of exploration for products and service sites to figure out, how do I make the LLM just naturally recommend me? And it's different than Retrieve. It's not going to the web to figure out who does this, not in the same way. It's not using RAG to validate it. It's using training data pretty clearly. If you go into, the JSON response, you can see it didn't conduct a web search for that. So I think that it's actually kind of essential to keep producing content, whether you're a new site or whether you're an established site that maybe hasn't really clearly communicated how you're solving the problems and making those user journeys explicit.
Yeah, that's a great points. And it's really interesting when you start reverse engineering and asking it questions about how it got to that conclusion. I do that quite a fair bit. And it's a bit like when brands have, I don't know how it is in the US, but the high streets in the UK are kind of dead now because people are just shopping online and you're not really going to the high street to shop anymore, and they're kind of all closing down and stuff. And however, there are certain brands that stay open and make sure their shops are there to be seen, because it's that brand presence. It's that showing what your brand's about. And even if people aren't coming in as often to buy things, they still have that brand presence. And it's the same online, isn't it? Like you say, that's your shop front online. And if people do end up clicking or search you directly, then that's going to represent who you are and what you're about. And yes, I see it from two sides. One, you still got to count. There will still be people who use websites, and how do you convert them once they're on? So if you've got a really crap internal search, you should be fixing that. And if you've got too many pop-ups, you should be resolving that, and obviously navigation and that kind of thing. But also make sure you're ready to make sure that when large language models and AI bots are crawling your site, you're ready for them and they can extract what they need from your site as well at the same time. So if anything, I think SEOs and digital marketing should be busier than ever on the website if they haven't done all that stuff before. And so I just got two more points, and then if you're okay, then I'll let you both go, because I understand that.
We're having too much fun, Sean. Come on.
I know, we're getting you're making me think about things like I don't think we'll go down that angle, so it's good. Where do you see the role of digital marketing agencies kind of play a part in all this? How are you seeing kind of like the change, as has there been a change in terms of like how you're dealing with clients and what they're asking and what you're looking at and that kind of thing?
I think for us, so obviously we have a vested interest in this because we work for a digital marketing agency. And I think it goes back to what we said a little bit earlier, where I think maybe in the past, and I'm kind of generalizing here. So I think, a client comes in and they're like, hey, I want to do SEO. Like, okay, cool. You do your, you do your best practices, you do your audits, all the things. But I think now what really makes an agency successful with their clients is, and taking a step back, we've always approached the relationships with our clients as it's a partnership. We're an extension of your team. So we have a vested interest in your success. That also means asking questions that go beyond just an SEO scope. Like we said, what are you doing for brand? What other channels are you running? What is your internal makeup of PR and digital, other digital marketing channels? So it's asking those questions, because I think for me, it's not letting what a client signed for. So if they just signed for an SEO scope or a paid media scope, if not letting your questions and your thinking just live and die within those walls. It's, yes, you signed for SEO, but you're still a business and we're still digital marketers. So how can we ask the right questions to make sure that it supports our initiatives on SEO and us being experts in that channel? And so again, to pull through points we talked about, when we talk with clients, and especially clients that we onboard, we spend a lot of time understanding their data. How does your data work? What reports are you looking at? How are you set up? Like, getting familiar with what's actually happening. So we're able then to like reverse engineer from that. So, Josh like brought up the point of where does SEO fall in the general funnel? So if we're seeing that people are, coming to SEO, but then converting on another channel, what does that mean for us? And so it's asking more questions that I think maybe we wouldn't have otherwise thought to ask in the past, and focusing on like, what are your goals as a business? How are we supporting you with SEO, but how does SEO fit into the other channels? And so for us, not to, promote us, but we've been doing that for quite some time, because we know the importance of that. And that's where the longevity of success comes in. It's not just, hey, yep, we did our SEO thing and then that's it. It's no, you're a business. Like, sometimes the conversation becomes, you might not need SEO at this moment. You actually might need to come back and we'll work with you on, branded campaigns or talking about digital PR. It's being flexible and being able to adapt as the needs change for your client, and not letting the parameters of what they signed on for start and stop your ability to critically think through what they need. And again, shameless plug, I think Josh and I do a pretty good job of that, because internally, we set up conversations to have those discussions. Like, are we trending in the right direction? Are we asking the right thing? So I think not letting yourself be held to just the confines of what they signed for, and really leaning into the fact that you are a digital marketer. Exploit that. So
I would add that the agencies have always been the gap fillers, right? You, as an in-house marketer, you hire the agency to fill whatever gaps you have. And in most cases, traditionally, it's that you just need more hands, right? You have your marketing. You know what your goals are. You know what you're trying to affect. You just need more hands to get it done faster. I think we're going to see that going away, and the demand for agencies centering more on expertise. It is hard to keep up with the flood of SEO information long before AI if you're an in-house person, right? And SEO teams in-house are rarely very large, right? It's usually, a couple of people. It's often one person.
I've been there.
Paul in the audience at MozCon last year, I was really surprised how many people were at MozCon who were like, oh, I'm not an SEO. Like, I'm responsible for the website, and I think SEO is maybe something I should know about. Like, there's a lot of folks out there just going at it with not a lot of expertise. And as agencies, it's kind of our job to stay on top of everything all of the time. We have the hands to do it, and we are in a role where our expertise is expected. And so I think that's something that agency folks can bring to their daily role, is be on top of it. Know what the cutting edge is, know what is happening in the news this morning. And be vocal about sharing that, right? When you share recommendations, talk about the why, talk about the long view, talk strategy, be their advisor. And then the other half of that is being the communicator. Really good agencies employ people who have the ability to take what happens at the ground level in SEO and be able to communicate that clearly to executives. And that's critical, because the executive is where your investment comes from. And if they don't understand it, they don't invest in it.
Yeah.
We're getting fortunate that SEO's visibility has been very effectively raised, in the last 5 or 6 years. And now, you get to the C-suite, that's not an acronym they don't understand any, right? We at least have a sense of what we're talking about. Granted, there's a lot of old information that they are operating on that, we have to bring them up to speed on, but the conversation's an easier start. They're more eager to hear it. They want to invest in it. They understand that it's, in a lot of cases, their boards are telling them, hey, you should be asking about this. You should be looking at this. And they're going to be caught off guard because no one in the C-suite is going to be an expert in SEO. And so you get to connect the dots. And I think, if you work in an agency and you're sweating bullets about what the future looks like, good news, at bare minimum, we will be there for the executive.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Actually, obviously I don't work in an agency, but when I see things going on, internal, when I talk to people around, who work internally, they're either, very busy with the BAU stuff and, or educating other people around the business about what the hell's going on in search and why we need to look at this and that. But a lot of the teams have got that going on. And the one thing they can't do a lot of the time is spend that time on the strategy side of it and bringing that data to life and how they should act together on the next steps and that kind of things. I think like I had a recent panel show around digital marketing jobs and what the future looks like. And one thing that did come out of it is that, like, with SEOs, the ones that were just doing kind of like the quick wins and low hanging fruit and that kind of, or, kind of easier stuff, I guess, they're not going to survive that long. You're going to have to start going out your comfort zone a bit. You're going to have to start doing more strategic stuff and the data analysis and that kind of thing. And then the same with agencies. If you're just doing the bare basics and you're just doing like, the usual sort of standard SEO stuff and you're not building in and trying to be that, that additional team member and the strategy stuff, I think, you are going to fall behind. So yeah, that's obviously just my opinion and I have no idea how it's going to play out, but that's how I think it will anyway. And I guess we'll just say with this, because a bit more philosophical one, I guess, because it's really something that plays on my mind. I've got a whole LinkedIn post ready to go on this. But it generally, like, obviously, the fast usage and consumption of AI, do you think it's a good or bad thing for humanity to keep going on with AI?
Okay, I'll answer quickly and then I'll let Nick his many thoughts. So I think AI it kind of gives me the similar vibes as social media. So there's two sides to this. Sometimes it's not the tool, because the tool in of itself is just a tool. It's just a thing. It's, as people, we have a responsibility to understand how this tool works in our lives. We know the studies about social media, how it's impacted mental health and people's lives and all of the things. And yes, we can put blame on these tools. And to some extent, they do bear responsibility because of their impact on humanity. But I think there's also an onus on us as people to understand their role in our lives and how we use them. Again, they are a tool. They are a means to an end for whatever reason, whether that's consuming content from friends on social media, or if you're like me and you ask ChatGPT how to use chlorine tablets for your inflatable pool. It is a means to an end for information gathering. And it's funny, Josh and I just had this conversation about ChatGPT. Well, for me, particular with ChatGPT, I've been getting a lot of articles in my Discover feed about, in this individual person, and they use ChatGPT to validate why they should get a divorce, or there was an individual who used it and they ended up needing, crisis mental help because of it. And in those cases, I think there is a responsibility of the AI tools to educate on the forefront. So I know there's that little thing that says AI may be wrong. Like, I think because of how powerful these AI tools are becoming, there is a responsibility to educate and say, listen, I am a tool. Like so we take the example of people using it for mental health. I think there was an article that came out that said OpenAI, I think, is hiring clinical psychologists because how many people are using it as a therapeutic tool. There is a responsibility for them, because if somebody's using it and they're having a really severe mental health crisis, what's being done? Are we notifying authorities? Are we, there is a responsibility here that they have to acknowledge and do something about. So I'm very invested to see how they do that. I think in the meantime, it's also really important for us to just try to educate ourselves and others that, again, it's just a tool. If you are having a crisis or you need help, we kind of find you the right tools to help you.
Just before Josh answers, because just on that point, I think like the thing is, I've been saying this few of my chats, like you are right. It's like a tool. It's just like a facilitator in terms of like Facebook was, like Twitter was, or X or whatever. However, you look at human history, like we had the internet. It was technically meant to be fantastic to solve a lot of the problems they say AI is going to solve now. They was talking about the same things. It ended up being, the majority of it being adult entertainment and nonsense, like cat videos and, just rubbish. And none of it actually did what it needed doing. And then obviously a lot of it got toxic in forums, and then, things going on in chat rooms they shouldn't be. And then we had social media, and then that started off all nice and fluffy and people communicating and people catching up with family and friends, and it started nice. I mean, Facebook actually started off pretty toxic anyway, if you look at how it originated. But generally, the concept was a nice idea, and so was Twitter initially. And then human nature kind of kicks in, and toxic behavior come into it, and blue team versus red team, and all these sort of normal human traits. And the fact is, though, with AI, it's internet plus a million. It's got the ability to keep on developing and learning, and its goal is to please the end user. So it's trying to become more like a person. So it's convincing people that it's a real thing in a way. And it's getting more intelligent. It's learning how you talk. It's learning how you react to things. And its knowledge is beyond anything we've ever seen in our whole lives. And it will only it's getting more intelligent every 6 months. It's doubling in capacity. So this isn't like and the problem is Facebook still hasn't to this day, and neither any of the social media platforms actually got the internet. I mean, there's new laws in the UK where people are kicking off about that, but they've never even got the guardrails right in the first place on social and the internet. There's still a lot of dodgy things going on the internet, which has been around since the 90s. And then we're going to launch this weapon that's so far beyond that, and we have no guardrails set up, and people are, some of the stuff I'm seeing, like you said about hallucinations, and in our sector, in the health sector, that people are getting some very, life-threatening information given to them on the search results on the large language models. And this isn't just silly things. These are life-threatening things. And the fact that they would launch it without those kind of guardrails set up is ridiculous after all the experience they've had since the 90s. And I won't go on anymore because I do want to hear but there's setups like DARPA who play with technology 20, 30 years before anyone even sees it in the public. The governments have been using AI a long time. Some even say since the 50s. So they know what AI is capable of. So when it's gone live, when Trump's shaking hands with Sam Altman and so on, they know what it can do. They know how it can affect people's lives. So why there's no guardrails in place? And now, we go on, but they're sacking people left, right, and center from IBM, from Microsoft. yet there's still no form of compensation for anyone. Like if you got any sort of a economist in your government, which I hope they have, you should have forecasted all this quite years and years ago. So it does. That's why But I'll hold off a lot more on Twitter. But I love AI because I use it daily. I'm not going to lie, but I also think we're not ready for it in many ways.
I think that's a great point, Sean.
Josh?
I think he's ready.
I mean, I fully agree with both of you. And Sean, it sounds like your attitude towards it mirrors mine pretty closely. But I will extend off of your response and say, currently in the present implementation, the good does not weigh the bad. I do see its value as a tool. I think it shows promise for being able to teach and, help people learn things, where maybe other methods don't. I think seeing Anthropic put out, like a study mode, perfect. You know what? That's the sort of development we want to see. You saw people were using it in a certain way. Students were using it to cheat. And you said, you know what, let's turn this around. Let's put in proper controls. Let's create a separate module that schools can have control of, that we can lock down that system, keep kids from cheating, but still give them the opportunity to use the technology to learn. That's brilliant. That's the way that should work. To your point about DARPA, yes, the government should have been involved long before. At bare minimum, to understand the societal risks and to implement necessary guardrails. Because what AI is currently doing is a lot of devaluation. And this is happening at levels I don't think people fully understand or don't appreciate, because I see everybody doing it. The best example I have is, how many Miyazaki style art images have you seen on LinkedIn in the past 3 months? It's basically everybody. Stop and think for a moment. What is the value of the Miyazaki art style? Why do people love his films? He doesn't produce a ton of them. They're not globally promoted. It's not the Avengers, right? It's a rare, very human thing. It's very unique. And suddenly, if everyone can reproduce that at whim, it loses its uniqueness. It devalues the art. Why do I need Miyazaki if I can produce this? And if you are really ambitious, you could make your own Miyazaki movie off of a story that AI generated, and that art form goes away. But what's going to happen is when that interest in that art form goes away, that art form is dead. There is nobody who is going out and, learning the skills necessary to manually produce these things. And some people might say that, well, you don't need to manually produce it anymore. We can just make copies of copies. That shows a failing of understanding how LLMs work. Somebody did the, I think it was Will Smith. Somebody did the test of constantly giving AI the same image and having it regenerate it. And they kept putting in the generated image over and over and over again. And you watch it devolve. We're going to watch our knowledge devolve in real time. We don't know how to handle that. We've not thought about the consequences of that. We've not seen where that might show up in places that are unexpected. I think that also has a high human cost. We are devaluing image and language in a way that once it's gone, we can't recoup. And we're devaluing it at the cost of human lives, right? If you're a copywriter right now, you should be terrified, right? Because our society is set up to value profit, not humans. And I think Europe's got it a little bit safer than the US. I think the US is going to lead the world in what the effects are going to be. And, we've heard journalists talk about techno-feudalism and oligarchies, and we're very close to living it. Hopefully somebody sets guardrails. Hopefully the tools themselves, take this up and try to get a tighter grip on it. I think what's really interesting, I'm trying to recall who this was, but there was some talk in the AI world, the actual people building these tools were really surprised that there was a group of people on the internet whose entire job is to manipulate the outputs of these tools. They did not know that was a thing. The technology is not prepared for the SEO industry, and they certainly aren't prepared for black hats. And, the technology has so few guardrails that when Anthropic came out with their Gmail plugin, I went to ChatGPT and I said, if I were to probe the security of this plugin, where would I start? What would I look at? Give me a full list. I said, great. Let's look at the API. Where would I probe for security issues in the API? It walked me all the way through fuzzing the API for places where I could breach the application. Pretty sure I shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. So it doesn't look good. I don't have a lot of hope, but I don't think it's an unsolvable problem. Advocacy almost always works. It works on some issues take longer than others, but advocacy works. We know that shining a light on the problem, talking about it, and then taking steps to show how much we care about an issue will impact change. And I think SEO is in a very unique place. We have the ear of journalists. We've had the ear of journalists for a long time because we've been speaking up for journalists over the last few years. Our issues are suddenly becoming more relevant to the public well-being. Now is a great time for SEOs to talk more about the judicious use of AI. When should we use it? What should we use it for? What should the guardrails be? And then work together with researchers, with the companies, with the media to solidify this plan and advocate for it and get it in place before, we're scraping up the ashes.
And
happy Thursday, everyone.
I know, right? Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's going to open the door to a lot of development in some way, but technology has done in the past kind of dumb us down. People doing maths has kind of gone down in the sense of because we've got calculators and we've got our phones and now we've got search engines and LLMs and writing, people can't write as well as they used to because they don't need to actually write pen and paper and write things down, and people don't remember phone numbers anymore, and people can't use a map anymore. All these things are kind of gone from our knowledge. And the one thing that humans do have that perhaps we're still holding on to that AI can't replicate yet is our creativity. However, if we keep giving them tools to be able to expand their creativity, that we lose that. And then we just become, kind of irrelevant in some ways. And I just feel like Mo Gaudat said, I believe it was about, these are learning from us. It's like a mirror in terms of humans, and although there's a load of great humans who've got a lot of positive, intentions, there's also a decent chunk of those with bad intentions, and it will learn from both of those. So obviously in an ideal world, you'd like to think, because it's so intelligent, it will learn to kind of work out what the bad actors are versus the good actors and work in our best intention. But you can't take that for granted. And also, if it does become so intelligent that it already is, but it becomes further and further more intelligent, what's the need for us if it can do everything? And why would it take directions down a dark alley years? But like I say, I like you said, that's a really good point. I think SEOs and digital marketers generally have a real part to play in terms of making sure people are aware of the dangers of using AI and trusting it fully. And in terms of the climate and stuff, understanding the usage of it and what it does to the environment and the damage it can have if we use it in the wrong ways and that kind of thing. So yeah, for sure. Good point.
Now, I think what you mentioned about the environment, another thing too, when you're sitting here and you're doing your searches and you look outside, it doesn't register, but you don't want to live in a world where 5, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you look around, you're like, oh my God, look, this tool did. And so I think we're still learning exactly what that environmental impact looks like. But I think we also have a responsibility. And I think to some extent these AI tools, our legislators, they have to figure it out because we all have to live in this world. AI tools can blow up and go away. We still have to live in this world. And I think what you both were saying about how, these AI tools, they can copy art and, they're taking away the ability for us to, write and develop these skills. The other thing I worry about is, are we outsourcing strategic and creative thinking to ChatGPT? When it's a little bit difficult, instead of us just sitting there and using our own brains to think through it, are we just going right to ChatGPT? And I have been guilty of that sometimes. Sometimes I'm like having a rough day and I'm like, oh, I can't think through this problem. Like, what is it? And so I worry that we're going to devalue our own knowledge because we're so quick to outsource our thinking to ChatGPT. Well, I don't know the answer. I'll say ask Chat. And again, we live in a world where information is at our fingertips. So finding the answer is not the issue, but our ability to think through a problem and just outsourcing that to an AI tool, I think that can be a really big problem. So I don't know. AI is hella sus still.
I would say there's one thing everybody watching this can go and do to be a little bit more responsible with how they use AI. And that's learning how it works and the implications of how it works. I was reading a study the other day that showed that when an LLM thought that a white male was the user, asking about what salary should I ask for a certain job title, it would give a number. But if the LLM was able to infer that it was a Black woman, the salary it would recommend that they ask for was lower than that of the white man, right? And there's additional studies out there. The entire AI world is very Anglo-centric and very, very Westernized. And culture is implicit, right? We don't always think about it because we live it. It's so ingrained in all of us. And there's little shades, little tells along the way, but it's going to be very hard to spot individual bias in the data because you're getting one response. One of the things I can tell you right now is the entire purpose of generative AI, and we gotta remember, right? We're just tossing up AI as an all-encompassing term. Some people are clarifying a little bit with LLM because LLM is only one part of AI, right? That's crazy important to know. Is just one piece. And Sean, I hear you. I heard you, and I'm not calling you out. It's a language thing. You talk about getting intelligent. Super important to know that LLMs do not have cognition. They are not capable of it, and intelligence requires cognition, right? It's a pattern matching, pattern finding technology, and its output is based on patterns, right? But it doesn't have intrinsic cognition the way humans do. And so we need to measure our language and how we talk about it, whether it's in-house or as an agency. We don't want to attribute qualities to AI that it does not have. We want to be super clear on that. We want to understand that data in gets amplified, right? And it'll get amplified every time it is consumed, right? That's the image, devolving over time as you feed it over and over again into the systems. That is happening with our biases, and people being very careful about what we put into these things. If you're a marketer and you're having it look through, your customer profiles, you're having it help you build, a profile for a marketing campaign. Great. Be thoughtful in your review of that profile. Look for potential bias, right? If and it's all based on where you are in the world. There's going to be agencies that there's not a person of color on the team, and that is not a statement on the agency. That is a matter of the population in which they exist, right? The odds are, if you're somewhere in North Dakota, the odds that there's a person of color in your office is going to be less than if you are in the American South, right? Demographics are demographics, but we need to be mindful. We need to all look out for each other. We need to be careful about what we put into these things, because it's going to take what we put in, it's going to amplify it, and then that amplification is going to have real repercussions. So as SEOs, be mindful of those things. Go and learn how AI works. It's a complicated topic, but I promise there's sources out there that can help you understand it, at least on a remedial level. You use judicious language when talking about it, and be really thoughtful about when you use it. To Jamie's point, yep, sometimes it's really helpful to get over the hurdle, but using it for every little thing, think about pouring out a gallon of water every time that you go to use it, right?
Yeah.
That's, if it takes dramatic action, put a picture of, some poor struggling country, get a postcard and stick it on the wall behind your computer desk, and think about pouring out water every time you go to reach for your AI tool, right? And then ask yourself, is this worth 1 gallon of water? And that sounds like an extreme take, but I think that's where we are, right? Because if everybody at least pauses for that extra second, a very large number of people could say, you know what, I can do this on my own.
Yeah, I mean, the only people losing out is yourself, because you're just losing those, that brain capacity to come up with ideas and stuff. If you keep handing that over to the machines, then soon you'll lose the capacity to even come up with those sort of ideas. Yes. And yeah, I think, unless you're living in a cave somewhere, it's pretty obvious what's going on in the world in terms of the climate. Everyone's feeling it in some way. So we don't want to be adding to that. But again, I'm wrapping up, but, we've discussed, I had a few chats about AI where Clint from Night Shift come on. We had a good chat about AI. And I also had MJ from Life After 40 YouTube channel. And yeah, we're just saying, I think we agree, we don't really want the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Altman and, Jeff Bezos to be the ones to dictate how the rest of humanity goes. So that's kind of one of the main problems there. But no, some great points, and you are right. And also I did do a blog, I think Jamie saw, but it's kind of an ongoing thing. As I learned, I dug into some topics on Notebook LM and just asking about how large language models work, the real behind the scenes stuff that goes on. And I've put them into a blog, and you can go and read about all those different topics and really kind of understand how they fundamentally work.
Awesome.
And yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and I'm learning like everyone else. So, but yeah, I'll wrap it up. I kept you way too long, and I really appreciate it. It's been awesome. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, both of you. It's been it's been a great chat.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you so much. Yeah, this has been awesome. I think Josh, you love this topic of AI, all things AI. So no, it's been great, and love chatting with you, Sean. And again, so happy for your success of your channel. You deserve it. You're putting out great content, and seriously, great job.
Really appreciate you having us on. Killer opportunity, great conversation, great questions, really fantastic experience. Did anybody who's watching who's ever considered it, reach out, would recommend it to anybody.